Over the past few decades, Europe has become massively dependent on Russian oil and natural gas, and which is why energy has been at the forefront of the European debate. The bloc says new measures will cut oil imports from Russia by up to 90%. However, it will still use Russian gas. Before the sanctions were announced, about half of Russia's crude oil exports went to Europe. Russia is the world's third biggest producer of oil. So who are Europe's biggest importers? Who are Europe's biggest importers of Russian oil and the ones that will be impacted the most? According to the Energy Information Administration, in 2020, the Netherlands and Germany imported the most number of barrels of crude oil per day from Russia, followed by Poland, Finland, Slovakia, Italy, Lithuania and Hungary. Slovakia and Hungary received 96% and 58% of the oil imports from Russia last year. In 2020, the Netherlands and Germany imported the most Russian oil per day. Russia also supplies the European Union with 40% of all the natural gas it imports. Countries like Germany depend on it for almost half its gas needs. According to the International Energy Agency, in 2020, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Hungary and Poland were among the top importers of Russian gas in Europe. Earlier this month, Germany dropped its opposition to Russian oil bans. Olaf Scholz's economy minister says the country would be ready to bear the heavy load. Poland also pledged to end Russian oil imports. However, Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic and Bulgaria, these countries said they cannot afford to cut off the Russian pumps. And so the bloc agreed on a compromise agreement. In response to Western sanctions, the Russian president announced unfriendly nations will pay for gas in rubles. So Russia's Gazprom cut off supplies to the Netherlands, Poland, Bulgaria and Finland. Moscow has refused to restart these until payments are made in Russian currency. Payment in rubles would shore up the Russian currency and thereby benefit its economy. The United Kingdom gets 8% of its oil imports from Russia and 5% of its gas supplies. So the UK government has also vowed to bring down Russian oil and gas imports by the end of the year. But amid the battle between world leaders, citizens across Europe, especially in the UK, are facing rising energy and fuel bills. UK petrol and diesel prices have also soared. The government is now warning of potential power cuts to as many as 6 million households this winter, as it predicts major gas shortages if Russia cuts off more supplies to the European Union. With a growing list of Western sanctions against Russia, the anti-West rhetoric by Vladimir Putin is also mounting. The Western leaders' plan of inflicting economic pain on Moscow has boomeranged, with Putin controlling oil and gas supplies. Unless European countries find concrete alternatives, a transition which could take years, a fact that the Kremlin is well aware of and Putin is leveraging to show how much Europe needs Russia. So the question of Europe finding alternatives is a complicated one, and an answer could be a long way ahead. For more on this, with us on the broadcast is David Dunn from the UK. He is a professor of international politics at the University of Birmingham. Thanks very much, David, for being here with us. Help us better understand the immediate challenges that Europe will have to face as a result of this decision, and how prepared is Europe really to implement this ban? The UK already is looking at power shortages and how 6 million households will have to be without power this winter season.
Well, Europe has responded to this crisis, seeing what's happened as a strategic shock an act of aggressive war against a fellow European democracy, and they see the power responses to that in that context. What they see is a country that's broken all international law in the way in which it's trying to recolonize a former colony of the Soviet Union, and their response to, by imposing a sixth round of sanctions, including the oil sanctions on Russia, are seen as part of that wider context. So yes, there are some divisions, but actually the European response has been remarkably united in the face of this wanton act of aggression in Europe, and they're prepared to make the sacrifices accordingly. Just to correct the detail, the British government said, unless we take remedial action, there may be power cuts in the UK. Not that those power cuts were inevitable. The governments in Europe, including the United Kingdom, are taking measures to actually replace the dependence on Russian oil and gas and indeed coal. And that's because Russia's supply of those things is now seen as highly unreliable. Russia thought it could invade and conquer and kill one of its neighboring countries on the assumption that the West would have to keep buying its products of oil and gas. And the West is not prepared to do that, because to do that is both to allow them to carry on their aggressive war, but also actually to make us vulnerable to whenever they dictate what they say, we have to live on their terms because we are dependent on their energy. So as a consequence, there was a desire to move away from that dependence, to punish Russia for its colonial aggression, but also actually to use this as an opportunity to move away from the dependence on fossil fuels, which are also harmful to the environment. So there's plans to, in the short term, to burn more coal, which is carbon intensive, but also actually to move to wind and solar and wave power as a way of replacing the dependence on an unreliable and aggressive neighbor in the form of Russia.
Right, so these sanctions are aimed at exerting maximum pressure on Moscow to end the Russia-Ukraine war, but the sanctions so far have failed to do so. They've not worked. So to what extent are you optimistic that things will change to any degree as a result of this latest push?
Okay, sanctions don't have an immediate effect. The effect is one of as longer term rather than anything else. And we are seeing signs of the Russian economy starting to grind to a halt. Of course, there are other countries, India and China, that are helping Russia by buying more of its oil and gas as a way of allowing them to offset the losses to European markets. But actually, the sanctions are having an impact. They're having an impact across the board. There are many more shortages in Russia, which your report might have mentioned, than there are in Europe. And it's also actually about not being dependent on an unreliable supplier of your energy. What this war has demonstrated is that actually it's a strategic vulnerability to rely on Russia when it's a power that actually could at any moment cut off the supply of gas, which is a possibility that still remains on the cards, or indeed could actually demand that you stopped trying to protect one of your neighbors in response to your dependence on their energy supplies.
Right. One quick comment also on your assessment of the way Russia has used the oil factor to its advantage so far and how it could continue to do so.
Yes, absolutely. It's an incredibly cynical strategic approach on the part of Russia. The assumption that it can behave as barbarously, as murderously as it has in Ukraine, committing war crimes on a huge scale, on the assumption that the West is so dependent on its energy supplies that the West will not respond and allow it free hand to do so. Well, actually, the West has shown remarkable unity and standing by its values, by its principles, and saying we will not tolerate this situation. We will not be a purchaser of these products at the price of the blood of Ukraine.
WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.